The black woman was still a virgin at 40 until a giant Amish man asked to stay in her cabin during the worst blizzard the mountain had seen in decades. "Please, miss," the towering stranger pleaded through howling wind, his broad frame filling her doorway completely. The spinster herbalist had endured years of cruel whispers from valley folk who deemed her too strange, too educated, too stubborn for any decent man's consideration. They assumed she'd die alone in that isolated cabin, forgotten and childless. But this mysterious traveler carries legal documents that will transform her from unwanted outcast into the territory's most pursued woman, if she can navigate the dangerous choice between a marriage of convenience and genuine love. The giant's arrival sets forces in motion that will expose deadly secrets lurking beneath her community's surface, secrets that could destroy them both. Will accepting his shelter lead to her salvation or ultimate ruin? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. Temperance Blackwood knelt in her herb garden as the first whispers reached her ears. The morning air carried voices from the valley below, like poison on the wind. 40 years old and still alone up there. Ain't natural for a woman to live like that. My mama says she talks to them plants like they're people. She pressed her fingers deeper into the rich soil. The chamomile needed harvesting before the storm hit. Dark clouds gathered over the mountain peaks like an omen. The walk to town brought more of the same. Mothers pulled their children closer. When she passed, store owners watched her with suspicious eyes. At Henley's General Store, the price of flour had somehow doubled since last week. "That'll be $6, Henley said without meeting her gaze. Temperance placed the exact coins on the counter. No point in arguing. She needed the supplies more than her pride. Outside the store, widow Cordelia Hatcher held court with 3 younger women. Their voices dropped to theatrical whispers that somehow carried perfectly. "Poor thing don't even know what she's missing. My Henry says no man wants a woman who thinks she knows better than doctors. Probably forgot how to be feminine. All them books and herbs made her strange." Temperance walked past without changing expression. She had heard worse. The widow's venom had long since lost its sting. Back at her cabin, she stored the supplies and checked her medical kit. Mrs. Patterson was due to give birth any day now. The town doctor had already declared the baby breached and dangerous. He recommended expensive procedures that would bankrupt the family. Temperance knew better. She had delivered dozens of healthy babies that others deemed hopeless. The wind picked up as afternoon faded. This storm would be worse than usual. She could feel it in her bones. The animals had been restless for days. Even her chickens huddled close to the cup. She prepared a simple dinner of cornbread and beans. The isolation never bothered her anymore. Books provided better company than most people. Her grandmother's medical journals contained more wisdom than the town's so-called educated men. Thunder rolled across the valley. The first snowflakes began to fall. By evening, the blizzard had arrived in full force. Snow whipped against her windows like angry spirits. The wind howled through the pine trees surrounding her cabin. She had seen mountain storms before, but this felt different, angrier. She was banking the fire for the night when the knocking came. 3 heavy thuds that somehow carried over the screaming wind. Temperance froze. No one traveled these mountain roads in weather like this. The sound came again, more urgent this time. She approached the door slowly. Her shotgun leaned against the wall nearby, but something held her back from reaching for it. "Please, miss." The voice was deep but respectful. "I need shelter." She peered through the small window. A massive figure stood on her porch, snow covering his dark coat and wide-brimmed hat. He was easily the largest man she had ever seen. "Who are you?" "Name's Ezekiel Stoltzfus. My horse threw me about 2 miles back. This storm came up faster than expected. His accent carried the distinctive cadence of the Amish communities to the east. But what was an Amish man doing alone in these mountains? Temperance's hand hovered over the door latch. Every rule of propriety screamed against letting a strange man into her home, but Christian charity demanded she help someone in need. The wind gusted harder, rattling her windows. "Are you hurt?" "Hands are pretty near frozen. Horse ran off with most of my supplies." She could hear the pain in his voice. Frostbite could kill a man in weather like this. Temperance unlatched the door. The stranger stepped inside, bringing swirls of snow with him. He was even larger than she had thought. His shoulders nearly filled her doorframe, but his eyes were kind, and he removed his hat immediately. "Much obliged, miss. I know this ain't proper. Sit by the fire. I'll get something for your hands." She busied herself gathering supplies from her medical kit: dried willow bark for pain, comfrey salve for the damaged skin, clean cloth for bandages. When she turned back, he was studying her bookshelf with obvious interest. Most men in these parts couldn't read beyond their own names. "You got quite a collection there. Reading passes the time." She knelt beside his chair and reached for his hands. The skin was white and waxy. Definite frostbite, but not severe enough for permanent damage. As she worked, she noticed the leather satchel he clutched protectively. Official-looking papers peeked from the edges. Legal documents by the look of them. "You're not just a traveler. Are you Mr. Stoltzfus?" He met her eyes directly. "No, miss. I'm not." The storm intensified outside. Tree branches scraped against her roof like claws. They were trapped together until morning at least. Temperance finished wrapping his hands and stepped back. This giant stranger had appeared at her door, carrying official papers during the worst blizzard in years. Nothing about his presence felt like coincidence. "Why are you really here?" Ezekiel looked toward his satchel, then back at her face. "I came looking for you, Miss Blackwood. I got news that's going to change your life." Temperance stared at the giant Amish man sitting in her cabin. The fire crackled between them like a heartbeat. "You came looking for me?" Ezekiel nodded toward his leather satchel. "Been riding 3 weeks to find you. Had your location from the county records." She poured hot coffee from the pot, her hands steady despite her racing thoughts. "What kind of news requires traveling through a blizzard? The kind that changes everything." He opened the satchel with careful fingers. Legal documents spilled across her small table. Official seals and stamps covered the papers. Her name appeared on several lines in bold lettering. Temperance leaned closer. The firelight danced across words she struggled to understand. Inheritance, estate, beneficiary. "Your great-aunt Minerva Blackwood passed last month in San Francisco." The name meant nothing to her. Family connections had been lost decades ago, when her parents died young. "She left you everything: land, investments, property holdings across 3 states. Temperance sank into the opposite chair. "How much everything?" "Near $60,000 worth. Maybe more once the lawyers finish counting." The number hit her like a physical blow. She had never owned more than $50 at one time. 60,000 was a fortune beyond imagination. There has to be a mistake. Ezekiel pulled out a handwritten letter. The feminine script was elegant, but faded. She wrote this before she died. Says she tracked down her only living relative. Says she wanted her money to help someone who knew struggle. Temperance took the letter with trembling fingers. Her great-aunt's words spoke of loneliness and regret, of watching society dismiss women who chose independence over submission. "Why you? Why bring this news yourself? I work for the law firm handling her estate, specialized in tracking down missing heirs. He paused, studying her face. Your aunt left specific instructions about delivery. What kind of instructions? Ezekiel reached for another document. This one bore more official seals and ribbons. The inheritance comes with conditions. You got 6 months to marry a suitable man of good character. His voice grew quiet. If you don't wed by then, everything goes to the state of California. The coffee cup slipped from her hands. It shattered against the wooden floor, spreading dark liquid across the boards. Married? Your aunt believed marriage provided protection for women of means. She didn't want you facing this world alone with that kind of money. Temperance stared at the broken pieces of her cup. 6 months. She had gone 40 years without finding a man worth marrying. Now her future depended on it. When do the 6 months start? From today, when I officially deliver the news. The storm outside seemed to intensify. Wind howled through the pine trees like something wild and hungry. She stood and began cleaning up the broken ceramic. So I have until summer to find a husband or lose everything. That's the legal requirement. Yes. And if I refuse the inheritance entirely, then you stay exactly as you are now. The money goes to California either way. Temperance swept the pieces into her dustpan. Her mind raced through possibilities. $60,000 could transform the entire valley. A proper school, medical supplies, help for struggling families. But marriage to a stranger felt like selling her soul. There's more you should know, Ezekiel said. She looked up from her cleaning. News like this travels fast. I had to file papers at the county seat. Clerk's office, land records, inheritance court. He met her eyes. By tomorrow, every bachelor within 100 miles will know you're suddenly worth marrying. The implications hit her immediately. Men who had never given her a second glance would come calling, not for her mind or character, but for the fortune that now bore her name. How do I know which ones are genuine? That's the real challenge, isn't it? She finished cleaning and sat back down. The fire had burned lower while they talked. Outside snow continued to pile against her windows. What kind of man did my aunt consider suitable? Ezekiel consulted the legal documents. Someone of good moral character who will treat you as an equal partner. The exact wording is pretty specific about mutual respect. She thought about this carefully. Spent 2 years planning it, according to her lawyer. Temperance studied the stranger across from her. He had treated her with more courtesy in one evening than most men showed her in a year. Why stay to explain all this? You could have just delivered the papers and left. Your aunt paid me to make sure you understood everything completely and to answer any questions about the legal process. How long will that take? Few days, probably. Maybe a week if the storm keeps up. She glanced toward the single bed in the corner of her cabin. 1 room, 1 bed, an unmarried man and woman trapped together by weather and circumstance. People will talk. People always talk. Question is whether you care more about their opinions or your future. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Temperance watched the flames dance and thought about the woman in San Francisco who had seen something worth saving in a forgotten relative. $60,000. 6 months. One impossible choice between independence and opportunity. The storm showed no signs of stopping. Neither did the questions flooding her mind. The storm cleared by dawn, but news of Temperance's inheritance spread faster than wildfire. By noon, 3 men had already appeared at her cabin door with awkward proposals and transparent greed in their eyes. Ezekiel watched from the window as she politely declined each suitor. His presence complicated matters, but he showed no intention of leaving yet. That's just the beginning, he said, as the third man rode away, dejected. I know. She was preparing her medical supplies when the frantic knocking came. Mrs. Fletcher stood on her porch, tears streaming down her weathered face. It's Timothy. He's real sick and getting worse. Temperance grabbed her kit without hesitation. What are his symptoms? Fever, vomiting, can't keep nothing down. Dr. Weatherby gave him medicine 3 days ago, but he's only gotten sicker. They rode to the Fletcher homestead in tense silence. Ezekiel followed without being asked, sensing the urgency. Timothy Fletcher lay pale and shivering in his small bed. The 8-year-old boy's breathing was shallow and labored. His skin had a grayish tint that made Temperance's stomach clench. She knelt beside him and began her examination. His pulse was rapid and weak. His pupils were dilated despite the dim light. Small red spots dotted his arms and chest. When exactly did Dr. Weatherby treat him? Tuesday morning. Gave him a tonic for stomach troubles. Temperance frowned. The symptoms didn't match any stomach ailment she knew. This looked more like poisoning. What color was the medicine? Dark green. Tasted bitter, Timothy said. She opened her kit and began mixing a gentle emetic from dried herbs. The boy needed to purge whatever was making him sick. This will make him vomit. But that's good. We need to get the poison out. Poison? Mrs. Fletcher gasped. Something toxic is in his system. Could be accidental. Could be the medicine itself. Ezekiel moved closer to watch her work. She prepared the emetic with practiced efficiency, measuring each herb with precision. Where did you learn to do this? My grandmother taught me before she died. She delivered babies and treated sickness for 40 years. She carefully administered the mixture to Timothy. Within minutes, he was retching violently into a basin. The fluid that came up was the same dark green as the medicine. That's not normal, Mrs. Fletcher whispered. Temperance studied the vomit with clinical detachment. The color was wrong. The smell was wrong. This wasn't any legitimate medicine she recognized. Has Dr. Weatherby treated other children recently? The Morrison boy last week. Little Sarah Jenkins the week before that. Same symptoms? Now that you mention it, yes. Both got real sick after his treatments. A cold dread settled in Temperance's chest. 3 children, all with identical symptoms after seeing the same doctor. She prepared another mixture, this one to neutralize toxins and support Timothy's liver. Activated charcoal from burned willow bark, milk thistle for liver protection, clean water to prevent dehydration. This will help his body process whatever made him sick. As she worked, Ezekiel asked quiet questions about her methods. His legal training made him naturally curious about evidence and patterns. You really think the doctor poisoned him on purpose? I think something in that medicine is making children sicker instead of better. She spent the next hour monitoring Timothy's condition. Slowly, his color began to improve. His breathing grew stronger. The red spots started to fade. He's going to be fine, she told Mrs. Fletcher, but keep giving him clean water and this herbal tea every few hours. What about Dr. Weatherby? Should we tell him what happened? Let me think about that first. They rode back to Temperance's cabin as the sun set behind the mountains. Ezekiel was unusually quiet during the journey. You saved that boy's life today. Maybe. We'll see how he does overnight. You don't take compliments well. She guided her horse around a fallen branch. Compliments don't mean much when children are getting poisoned. You really think it's deliberate? 3 children with identical symptoms after seeing the same doctor? That's not coincidence. Back at her cabin, she pulled out her grandmother's medical journals. The old woman had documented every case she treated, every remedy she used. Somewhere in those pages might be clues about what they were facing. Ezekiel built up the fire while she read. His presence had become comfortable somehow. He didn't try to fill silence with meaningless chatter. "Found something," she said after an hour of reading. She showed him a journal entry from 15 years earlier. Her grandmother had treated similar symptoms in 3 children from the same family. Mercury poisoning. Someone was giving them medicine with mercury compounds. Why would anyone do that? Mercury was supposed to cure everything back then. Doctors used it without understanding how toxic it was. Or understanding perfectly well. She looked up from the journal. "What do you mean?" "I used to prosecute medical fraud cases back in Pennsylvania. Saw plenty of doctors who hurt patients deliberately." "Why?" "Sick patients keep coming back. Desperate families pay whatever you ask." The implications settled between them like a heavy weight. If Dr. Weatherby was poisoning children deliberately, Timothy Fletcher was just the latest victim in a long campaign of exploitation. "We need proof." "I know how to gather evidence," Ezekiel said. "Question is whether you want to get involved in something this dangerous." Temperance looked at her grandmother's journals, then at the man who had brought both fortune and crisis into her life. That little boy almost died today. If someone is hurting children for profit, they need to be stopped. Could be dangerous. People don't like having their trust in authority figures questioned. Good thing I'm already used to being unpopular. Outside, an owl called through the darkness. Inside, 2 people who barely knew each other began planning how to expose a killer. Timothy Fletcher was sitting up and asking for food by morning. Word of his miraculous recovery spread through town faster than Temperance's inheritance news had. By afternoon, she had received visits from 4 more families. Each told similar stories. Children treated by Dr. Weatherby for minor ailments, medicine that made them sicker, bills that emptied family savings. Ezekiel documented every account in his careful legal handwriting. Names, dates, symptoms, financial costs. A pattern emerged that chilled them both. "The Morrison family lost their farm paying medical bills," he said, reviewing his notes. "The Jenkins sold their livestock. Mrs. Patterson pawned her wedding ring." They spread the documents across her kitchen table. 12 families affected over 2 years. Always children. Always expensive treatments that failed to cure. "He's targeting the most vulnerable patients," Temperance observed, and the ones whose families will pay anything to help them. Dr. Weatherby's practice had grown increasingly profitable during the same period. He had purchased new equipment, expanded his office, bought a larger house on Main Street. "We need samples of his medicine. How do we get those without raising suspicion?" Temperance considered the problem. "Mrs. Fletcher still has the bottle he gave Timothy. I'll ask to examine it." That evening, she rode to the Fletcher homestead. Timothy was playing with wooden toys, his color completely restored. Mrs. Fletcher embraced her like family. "He's like a different child. Whatever you did worked a miracle." "I just helped his body heal itself." "Do you still have that medicine bottle?" Mrs. Fletcher retrieved the small glass vial from her kitchen shelf. Half the dark green liquid remained inside. "Can I take this to study? I want to understand what made him so sick." "Take it. I never want to see that stuff again." Back at her cabin, Temperance carefully examined the medicine. The smell was sharp and metallic. The consistency was too thick for any legitimate tongue. She added a few drops to clean water and observed the reaction. The liquid turned cloudy and separated into distinct layers. Definitely not standard medicine. Ezekiel watched over her shoulder as she conducted basic tests. Her grandmother's journals described methods for identifying common poisons. "The mercury test," she murmured, consulting the old pages. She placed a copper penny in a small amount of the medicine. Within minutes, The copper surface began to darken and pit. Mercury compounds, just like grandmother's notes described. Enough to cause the symptoms we saw? More than enough. This concentration could kill a child with repeated doses. They stared at the evidence in grim silence. Dr. Weatherby wasn't just incompetent. He was deliberately poisoning children for profit. We need to search his office. Breaking and entering is illegal, even when we suspect murder. What about during business hours? As patients? Ezekiel shook his head. Too dangerous if he suspects what we know. Temperance had a different idea. Tomorrow is Sunday. He'll be at church services. His office will be empty. That's still breaking and entering. Only if we break something. I know where he hides his spare key. The next morning, half the town gathered for Sunday services. Temperance and Ezekiel waited until the church bells finished ringing before approaching Dr. Weatherby's office. She found the key exactly where Mrs. Patterson had mentioned seeing him hide it. Under a loose board on the back porch, the office smelled of carbolic acid and something darker underneath. Chemical odors that made her nose burn. Ezekiel examined the appointment book while she searched the medicine cabinet. Dozens of identical bottles filled the shelves, all containing the same dark green liquid. He's been giving this to everyone, she whispered. Look at this. Ezekiel showed her the financial records. Patient payments matched exactly with property acquisitions. The Morrison farm purchased the week after their son's expensive treatment. The Jenkins livestock bought at half market value. He's not just poisoning them. He's positioning himself to profit when they go broke paying for treatment. Temperance found something worse in the back cabinet, a ledger book with detailed notes about each patient. Dosage amounts carefully calculated. Symptom progression tracked like a scientific experiment. He's been testing different concentrations. The coldness of it struck her like a physical blow. Children used as laboratory subjects. Families destroyed for profit, all hidden behind the respectability of medical practice. We have enough evidence now. Do we? His word against ours in court. Ezekiel was right. Dr. Weatherby was a respected member of the community. She was the strange woman who lived alone and practiced folk medicine. What about the other families? If they all testify together, they'd have to admit they trusted him over you. That their children nearly died because of their prejudice. The church bells began ringing again, signaling the end of services. They had minutes before people started returning to their daily routines. Temperance grabbed several bottles of medicine as evidence. Ezekiel copied the most damning pages from the financial records. They locked the office and replaced the key just as the first parishioners appeared on Main Street. Back at her cabin, they spread their evidence across the table. Bottles of poison disguised as medicine, financial records showing systematic exploitation, patient notes revealing deliberate harm. It's enough to hang him, Ezekiel said, quietly. If anyone believes us, they'll believe Timothy Fletcher's recovery. They'll believe the other children getting better under your care instead of his. Temperance studied the bottles of poison. Somewhere in town, Dr. Weatherby was probably planning his next victim. Another trusting family who would pay anything to help their sick child. When do we make this public? Tomorrow. Town meeting. Present everything at once so he can't prepare a defense. And if the town sides with him instead of us? Ezekiel met her eyes across the evidence. Then we take it to the territorial authorities and hope justice finds a way. The town hall filled beyond capacity by Monday evening. Word had spread that Temperance Blackwood would be making important accusations against a respected member of the community. Dr. Weatherby sat in the front row, confident and composed. His supporters filled the seats behind him. Widow Hatcher whispered poison in nearby ears about uppity women who thought they knew better than educated men. Temperance stood at the front of the room with her evidence spread across a table. Bottles of dark green medicine caught the lamplight like malevolent jewels. 3 weeks ago, Timothy Fletcher nearly died from medicine this man prescribed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some supportive, others skeptical. That boy had stomach troubles, Dr. Weatherby interrupted. Miss Blackwood's interference could have made things worse. Timothy is alive and healthy because she helped him, Mrs. Fletcher called out from the back. Temperance held up one of the medicine bottles. This contains mercury compounds in toxic concentrations, enough to cause organ failure in children. That's a serious accusation without proof, the doctor said calmly. Ezekiel stepped forward with his legal documents. We have proof. Financial records from your office showing a pattern of exploitation. Those records are private property. How did you obtain them? Does it matter if they prove you've been poisoning children for profit? The crowd grew restless. Some people stood to get better views. Others moved toward the exits, uncomfortable with the confrontation. Dr. Weatherby rose from his seat, projecting injured dignity. I have served this community faithfully for 8 years. My methods are modern and scientific. Your methods have made 12 children critically ill, Temperance replied. She began reading names from Ezekiel's list. Each family affected, each child poisoned, each financial loss that coincidentally benefited the doctor. The Morrison family lost their farm paying for treatments that made their son sicker. You purchased that farm for half its value. Business transactions have nothing to do with medical care. They do when you create the medical emergencies that force families into bankruptcy. More voices joined the argument. Parents who had trusted Dr. Weatherby began questioning their experiences. Others defended him out of loyalty or fear of admitting they had been wrong. Temperance pulled out her grandmother's medical journals. The old leather covers commanded respect even from skeptics. These journals document 40 years of healing in this community. They describe mercury poisoning symptoms identical to what we've seen in your patients. Folk remedies and superstition, the doctor scoffed. Superstition that saved Timothy Fletcher's life when your medicine was killing him. Mrs. Patterson spoke up from the middle of the crowd. My baby was breached and dying. The doctor said expensive surgery was the only hope. Miss Blackwood delivered her safely with just her herbs and skill. Other voices joined in. Families who had quietly sought Temperance's help when conventional medicine failed. Stories of healing that contradicted the doctor's claims about primitive methods. Dr. Weatherby's composure began to crack. These people are desperate to believe in miracles. They don't understand modern medical science. What science justifies giving mercury to children? Ezekiel demanded. Mercury compounds have been used medicinally for centuries. In concentrations that won't cause organ failure? The doctor couldn't answer that question without admitting guilt. His silence spoke louder than any confession. Temperance held up the bottle of medicine again. Anyone here can test this. Add it to clean water and watch what happens. Drop a copper penny in it and see how the metal corrodes. Several men volunteered to perform the tests immediately. The results were visible to everyone present. The liquid separated into toxic layers. The copper penny blackened and pitted. No legitimate medicine should react like that, said Tom Henley, the store owner. Dr. Weatherby tried one last defense. Miss Blackwood stands to inherit a fortune. She needs to discredit established medicine to build her own practice. The inheritance requires her to marry, Ezekiel pointed out. It has nothing to do with medical practice. How convenient that you're here to defend her interests. I'm here because I've spent years tracking medical fraud across 3 territories. You fit the pattern perfectly. The revelation stunned the crowd into silence. Ezekiel had been more than just a traveling legal clerk. He was an experienced investigator with specific expertise in medical crimes. "You've done this before," Temperance said, understanding finally clicking. "Pennsylvania, Ohio, Kansas. Always the same method. Poison children, bankrupt families, acquire property cheap." Dr. Weatherby's face went pale. His supporters began shifting away from him as the implications sank in. "That's impossible to prove." "I have documentation from all 3 territories. Warrants were issued in Pennsylvania 2 years ago." "Then why wasn't I arrested?" "Because you disappeared before the evidence was complete. It took this long to track you here." The town erupted in angry voices. Parents who had trusted their children's lives to a deliberate poisoner. Families who had lost everything to his schemes. Sheriff Morgan stepped forward from the back of the room. "Dr. Silas Weatherby, you're under arrest for fraud and attempted murder." The doctor tried to run for the side door, but the crowd blocked his escape. His guilt was written in every desperate movement. As the sheriff led him away in chains, the town fell into shocked silence. Their respected physician had been systematically destroying families for profit. Temperance began packing up her evidence, emotionally drained from the confrontation. Justice had been served, but the victory felt hollow after so much unnecessary suffering. Ezekiel helped her organize the documents. It's over now. For him, maybe. These families still have to rebuild their lives. That's where your inheritance could help. She looked around the room at faces filled with shame and gratitude. People who had dismissed her for years now understood her true worth. The inheritance suddenly seemed less like a burden and more like an opportunity. Dr. Weatherby's trial lasted 3 days. The evidence was overwhelming. Testimony from affected families filled the courtroom with stories of suffering and financial ruin. The judge sentenced him to 20 years in territorial prison. His assets were seized to compensate victims. Justice had been served, but the healing would take much longer. Temperance stood in the empty courtroom after the verdict, feeling the weight of vindication and responsibility equally. "You did the right thing," Ezekiel said beside her. 12 families lost everything because people wouldn't listen to the strange woman on the mountain. Those same people are listening now. The town had indeed changed its attitude toward her. Mothers who once pulled their children away now sought her medical advice. Men who had ignored her existence now tipped their hats respectfully. But the transformation felt hollow without meaningful action behind it. Back at her cabin, she spread her inheritance papers across the kitchen table. $60,000 could rebuild what Dr. Weatherby had destroyed. It could also create something entirely new. "I know what I want to do with the money." Ezekiel looked up from his legal documents. "Tell me." "A school. A real school with books and supplies and teachers who believe every child deserves education. That would help the whole community. And a medical clinic, properly equipped, stocked with legitimate medicines instead of poison." She had been planning this since the trial ended. The inheritance could transform Dusty Gulch from a struggling settlement into a thriving community. What about the marriage requirement? The question hung between them like morning mist. 5 months remained before the deadline. 5 months to find a husband or lose everything. "I've been thinking about that too." Ezekiel set down his pen and gave her his full attention. "My aunt wanted me protected. She thought marriage was the only way for a woman with wealth to stay safe. She might have been right. Or maybe she wanted me to find someone who valued more than just the money." Their eyes met across the table. The weeks since his arrival had revealed a partnership neither had expected. His legal mind complemented her healing wisdom. His respectful nature matched her independent spirit. "Are you proposing to me, Miss Blackwood?" "I'm suggesting we consider a partnership. Equal partners in all decisions. The inheritance used for community benefit, not personal luxury. That sounds like a proposal." She smiled for the first time since the trial ended. "Then I suppose it is." Ezekiel stood and moved around the table to kneel beside her chair. "Temperance Blackwood, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife and partner in all things?" "Yes, Ezekiel Stoltzfus. I would be honored." Their engagement announcement caused another stir in town, but this time the reaction was celebration rather than gossip. The woman who had saved their children was marrying the man who had exposed their tormentor. Wedding preparations began immediately. Temperance insisted on a simple ceremony at the new church site. The building fund had grown substantially since her inheritance became public knowledge. 2 weeks before the wedding, she received unexpected visitors. Mrs. Fletcher arrived with Timothy and 3 other families whose children had been poisoned. "We wanted to thank you properly," Mrs. Fletcher said. "And to give you this," Timothy added, holding out a hand-carved wooden box. Inside lay a collection of items from each family: a silver thimble from Mrs. Patterson, a hand-embroidered handkerchief from the Jenkins family, small tokens of gratitude from people who had learned to value substance over appearances. "We also wanted to ask about the school plans," Tom Henley said. "Construction starts next month. We'll have it ready for fall classes." "And the medical clinic?" "Spring, hopefully. I'm corresponding with supply companies in Denver and San Francisco." The families exchanged pleased looks. Their community was about to transform in ways they had never imagined possible. Wedding day dawned clear and bright. The entire town gathered at the church site, where the foundation had already been laid for the new building. Temperance wore her mother's simple white dress, altered to fit her mature figure. Ezekiel looked handsome in his best Amish suit, though he had agreed to trim his beard for the occasion. Sheriff Morgan performed the ceremony, reading vows they had written themselves, promises of partnership, respect, and shared purpose in serving their community. "Do you, Temperance, take Ezekiel as your equal partner in marriage and life?" "I do." "Do you, Ezekiel, promise to honor Temperance's wisdom and independence while sharing your strength and support?" "I do." "Then by the authority granted me by this territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." The celebration continued well into the evening. Tables of food covered the church grounds. Children played games while adults shared stories and laughter. As the sun set behind the mountains, Temperance and Ezekiel stood together, watching their community celebrate. The inheritance that had once seemed like a burden now felt like the greatest blessing of her life. "Any regrets about marrying the strange woman on the mountain?" she asked. "Only that it took a blizzard and a deadline to bring us together." 6 months later, the school opened with 32 students and 2 teachers. The medical clinic followed in the spring, staffed by a young doctor who practiced ethical medicine under Temperance's guidance. Dr. Weatherby's former patients had all recovered completely under proper care. Their families were rebuilding with help from the inheritance fund Temperance had established. On the first anniversary of their wedding, Temperance stood in the school doorway watching children learn to read. Timothy Fletcher was among the brightest students, his near-death experience transformed into appreciation for every healthy day. Ezekiel found her there, his legal practice now focused on protecting families from exploitation rather than prosecuting crimes. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Stoltzfus." "Happy anniversary, Mr. Stoltzfus." She rested her hand on her growing belly, where their first child grew safely. The strange woman who had lived alone at 40 was now the heart of a thriving community, surrounded by love and respect she had earned through dignity and service. The inheritance had given her the means to transform lives. Marriage had given her a true partner. But the real treasure was the community that had learned to value substance over appearances, wisdom over prejudice, and healing over harm.